This is the Medical College of Wisconsin's Oral History Project. Today is October 28th, 2016. I'm Dick Katchke, the Chief Historian, and I'm talking with T. Michael Bolger, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer Emeritus of the Medical College of Wisconsin. Mr. Bolger served for over 20 years as MCW's President and CEO, and I'm talking with him today to capture his recollections on his long-term experience at MCW. So let's start, Mike. You started as an undergraduate at Marquette University, where you had the intention of going into medical school. Can you talk a little bit about your years at Marquette and why you considered medical school?
Sure. Yes, I was born and raised in Minocqua, Wisconsin, and my family was pretty much, my extended family was pretty much connected to medicine. And it was assumed that I would be a physician too. And when I graduated from high school, I entered the pre-medical program at Marquette University. And in 1960, I was accepted into the Marquette University School of Medicine, among some others. I accepted the position, but the last semester of my senior year, I began to have second thoughts because I felt that I was entering for all the wrong reasons. And I thought I was a rather shallow young man and needed to experience some other things, and I decided to become a priest. So I went over to the medical school and withdrew from the school, and was told by Mrs. Casey, who was the then registrar of the school.
And that would have been Bessie Casey, correct?
Bessie Casey, that I would always have a place at this medical school. Little did she know it was after its president. But I spent 7 years in the Jesuit seminary, and during the days of the 60s, when the world had turned upside down, I decided to leave the seminary and try to save the world through social justice, and went to Northwestern University's law school, received a law degree, and came to Milwaukee and joined the law firm, which was then Quarles, Harriet, Clemens, Teschner, and Nelke, and is now Quarles and Brady, and spent 20 years working as a lawyer. And my first real client was the Medical College of Wisconsin.
Now, what year would it have been that you joined the Quarles law firm?
1970.
1970. So that would have been really during a transitional period for the medical school, where it had left
Yes.
Marquette and was in the process of trying to get some grounding financially, because it had some challenges. And
Yes.
also when the Regional Medical Center was in the developmental process, correct?
That's correct. And Louis Quarles was president of the medical school at that time. And he asked me, as a young associate in the law firm that he owned, to help out at the medical school. And so I became the assistant secretary to the board and lawyer to the board. And then Mr. Quarles died, and the board then turned to me, and I became the lawyer for the school, and had a wonderful time working with various people to make the transition from Marquette to the medical college smooth and legal. And so I spent a great deal of time with Ron Cornelius and Ed Lennon and others in the school to make it transition from Marquette University to the Medical College of Wisconsin.
Now, if we can back up, you mentioned Louis Quarles, who was the first president of the Medical College of Wisconsin. You're one of the few people that can help give us some background on Mr. Quarles and his personality, his leadership style. What do you recall about Mr. Quarles?
He was a wonderful man. He was what you call a Renaissance man. He read Greek and loved philosophy. And of course, my background as a Jesuit seminarian was 7 years of philosophy. So he and I got along quite well. He was very urbane, easy to talk to, easy to get along with. And just to give you a little vignette, when I came to Milwaukee to join the Quarles law firm, the very first weekend that I was here, they had a dinner dance for all the partners, a black tie dance, when I brought Ginny, my wife, to the ball with the black tie, and she didn't know anybody, but the practice was that the youngest associate's wife sat next to Mr. Quarles. So she sat next to Mr. Quarles. She was intimidated out of her mind. But at the end of the evening, she said to me, she said, "Mike, I hope you don't mind, but I think I'm in love again." He was that kind of a man. He was very easy to get along with, very smart, and was a sailor. He had a ship or a boat down at the yacht club called the Revolver, which is a old English word for sea dragon. And he sailed Lake Michigan with a passion. So.
Mm-hmm. And now, at the same time that he served as president, that was when Dr. Carrigan had served as dean.
That's correct.
And my understanding is their leadership styles weren't always compatible. They had a different leadership style.
Yeah, well, Mr. Quarles was a very engaging leadership style, engaging people, making them feel comfortable. Jerry Carrigan was very methodic, and he was somewhat rigid in his approach. But he was a very good dean.
And he was very bright. If I recall, he came from Harvard, too.
Yeah, he was very, very bright.
Mm-hmm.
He was a scholar, and he was very formal. Everything had to be according to the book with Dr. Carrigan.
Ron Cornelius served at a time when there was some real big financial challenges for the medical school. How did he help keep us solvent?
Well, just to give you an example of Mr. Quarles on that, when Marquette terminated its relationship with the Medical College of Wisconsin was originally the Marquette University School of Medicine, a separate corporation from Marquette University. And so the only thing that we had to do legally to do the separation was to amend the bylaws to remove the stipulation that the president of the institution would be a Jesuit priest. So the school had lost $1 million when the termination occurred. And Mr. Quarles went out on one weekend in 1969, I believe, and one weekend raised $1 million so that the doors could open the next day. It was literally that close to declaring bankruptcy. And Louis went out, Mr. Quarles went out and tapped his friends. He had a lot of friends in high places, and raised $1 million, which at that time was a lot of money, more than it is right now. And the doors opened, and Ron Cornelius became the CFO, and he was a real penny pincher. He was very strong in his determination of how this institution was going to be funded and run, and he ran it with a real attention to every penny.
Now, you mentioned Mr. Quarles and his involvement with the business community, the leaders here in Milwaukee. He was also very close to the Greater Milwaukee Committee, and the Greater Milwaukee Committee was also very engaged in making sure that the medical school survived and that the regional medical center could come into being. Did you have any interaction with the Greater Milwaukee Committee?
Oh yes, I was on the Greater Milwaukee Committee.
Oh, okay.
And it really wanted to see the regional medical center become an academic health center. And it worked very closely with the county people, particularly John Doyne, the county executive, to find a way to create a regional medical center and an academic health center. To be an academic health center, the linchpin is a medical school. You have to have a medical school. And so the Medical College of Wisconsin was it, because the University of Wisconsin-Madison had its medical school in Madison, and the Marquette University School of Medicine was down on the Marquette campus and affiliated with various hospitals. But when it was determined that the Medical College of Wisconsin would move from the Marquette campus to the campus where it is now situated, it needed the support of the movers and shakers in this community, and that was the Greater Milwaukee Committee.
And who are some of the people on the Greater Milwaukee Committee
Well, there
that
was
really
Joe
stepped up?
Heil, there was Bob Stevenson, there was Rob Foote, there was Chuck Jacobus, and I'm blanking, Bromo Seltzer, Louis Seltzer. Some wonderful men, mostly men. There were a few women, but they weren't on the board yet. But that would change soon.
That was reflective of the era, though.
Yeah, it was. But all the movers and shakers in town.
Well, Edmund Fitzgerald, if I recall.
Edmund Fitzgerald was on that board. George Caston.
And didn't they also take a look at the Houston Medical Center as a model for what we would hope to do
Yeah,
here?
more or less. Houston was looked at. Some of the other academic health centers in the country were viewed as models. I think the reason Houston was looked at is that we wanted to get into cancer. And Houston was a well-known cancer center with the M.D. Anderson Cancer Center, and that's who we sort of tried to model ourselves after.
Now, so you were serving in a role as the secretary to the board, and you were involved in the contracting for the creation then of the regional medical center.
Yeah, what happened was John Doyne came to the Greater Milwaukee Committee and said, let's put this deal together. And well, we'll sit down, we'll draft what's called the master lease. And the thought was that the county would keep the land and lease the land on a 100-year lease to the various institutions who would build here, which would include Children's Hospital, the Curative Rehabilitation Workshop, the Medical College of Wisconsin, and a new hospital called Frederick Memorial Lutheran Hospital, which didn't exist except on paper. So we got the lawyers together from those institutions to put together a master lease that all would sign. And since I was the youngest lawyer in the group, I got the job of drafting it. So I spent a great deal of time drafting the master lease. But it had its fits and starts. The county appointed Bill O'Donnell, who was, Jim O'Donnell, who was Bill O'Donnell's brother, as corporation counsel. And John Peterson, Dr. John Peterson, and Ed Mundy, who was the director of the the county grounds, to be the people to negotiate with the lawyers for the institutions, which included Wayne Roper as Freighter counsel, Ted Wiley as counsel for the Children's Hospital, and Alan Taylor, who was counsel for Curative, and me, who was counsel for the medical school. And so we sat down and started negotiating this, and things were going swimmingly. But then they had a change on the county board. A young firebrand got elected to the board by the name of Terrence Pitts. And he took it upon himself to take over the negotiations for county, and that delayed the institutions. He decided to redo the whole master lease, and that set us back almost a year. It was very frustrating. It got to the point where at one point we decided to withdraw and go to the Veterans Administration.
Well, in fact, I was going to raise, because Clement Zablocki at that time was the congressman.
Yes.
And he also represented the area where the Woods VA was located. Right. And he was encouraging us to have the campus located there, if I remember correctly.
And we decided to do it.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
We decided that we can't deal with the county anymore because Terry was so demanding of changes that we couldn't live with. I forget the name of the chairman of the county, Nowakowski, got the county's board in a closed room and explained it to them in no uncertain terms that they wanted the academic health center here at the campus. And so we finally put the last jot and tittle in place on the master lease and signed the master lease, and that freed us up to be able to start construction and let contracts and raise money, et cetera.
Now, if I recall, though, correctly, while you represented the Medical College of Wisconsin, as you mentioned, Curative, Freighter, and Children's also had representatives. Yeah. And this was during a controversial time on the creation of Freighter Hospital then as well.
Yes.
Now, wasn't there something in his will that also spoke to the Lutheran faith, and I believe the Lutheran Brotherhood was involved?
Yes. Well, what happened was the estate was run by Joe Rapkin, who was a lawyer at Foley and Lardner, and he took the Freighter money and put most of it in Mayfair.
That's correct. In fact, it was the Freighter Mayfair Mall, if I remember. Yes.
And the Lutheran Men's League sued the trustee to say that Freighter wanted to build a hospital, not a mall, and you're not following the precepts of the lease. And Mr. Rapkin, to his credit, said, "Here's the money, build it."
Wow.
And you go ahead and build it, and I'll have hands off.
Now, if I recall correctly, wasn't there some challenges where some of the other hospitals in town felt that they perhaps could be the legitimate heirs to the Freighter money then too?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, Milwaukee Lutheran Hospital for one.
Deaconess Hospital, St. Luke's.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, and if I recall, wasn't a deal worked out where Freighter and Deaconess, where Deaconess beds could be counted for Freighter beds then or something?
Yes, something like that. I'm not exactly sure of the entire way it worked out, but we were able to make the case that Freighter had a legitimate role to play as a separate primary or tertiary teaching hospital.
Now, you were involved when the name change occurred.
Yes.
And we had gone from, we were the Marquette University School of Medicine. Mm-hmm. After the separation from Marquette, had the name Marquette School of Medicine. Mm-hmm. And then, why was the decision made in 1970 to change the name again? Wasn't that from state influence?
Yeah, there was several reasons for it. Number one, Marquette wanted us to change our name.
Oh, okay.
because it was confusing for philanthropic purposes as to who was raising money for, quote, Marquette. And secondly, the state got an opinion from one of the assistant attorney general that the name Marquette was associated with the Roman Catholic Church and therefore a violation of the separation of church and state, and it would be appropriate for the name to change. And I'll never forget it because we were sitting at a meeting in the M&I boardroom, which is where the board met at that time because Jack Puliker was chairman of the board. And they said that the state wants us to change the name, and somebody said, what should we change it to? And Jerry Carrigan said, how about the Medical College of Wisconsin? Move it. Pass, and that was done.
No market research,
no
engagement of any of the key audiences.
No. Mm-hmm. Just let's do it and get it done and move on.
If I recall, wasn't something said where the Medical College of Pennsylvania was identified as a model name that was a prestigious name?
There was several. There was the Medical College of Georgia. There was the Medical College of Pennsylvania. There was the Medical College of one other.
Virginia, I believe.
It could be Virginia, but that's the way it happened.
The reaction wasn't what the board had anticipated, if I recall.
No.
The students and the alumni were not pleased,
They were not pleased at all, especially the alumni. As a matter of fact, what happened then is the alumni decided to have their own alumni association. The original Alumni Association was not part of the Medical College of Wisconsin. It was a separate corporation run by Bob Herzog and as a separate from the Medical College of Wisconsin, and it took me as president several years to change that.
When, if I recall, it was not always a pleasant working relationship between the Alumni Association and the medical school.
That's very true. The Alumni Association looked at the medical school sort of as a usurper. Usurped Marquette. How could you do that? Well, we didn't usurp. We just saved ourselves to save the existence of the medical school. And Marquette was the mover in terminating the relationship.
Now, after Louis Quarles died, David Carley was named as the president.
Yes.
And describe Mr. Carley's leadership style, your interactions with Mr. Carley.
Well, he was very different from Louis Quarles.
Okay.
He was a mover and a shaker. He was a real estate developer from Madison, and he was also a politician. He ran for governor of the state and other offices. He was a very energetic human being, and he did not suffer fools gladly, and he was always on the move. And he made snap decisions. It was very hard being his lawyer because he would go in and outline the deal and then say to me, put it
Now make
together
it work.
and disappear to his next place and forget about what he had just agreed to. And so I had to, I spent a lot of long nights putting stuff together to stay ahead of Dr. Carley.
Well, and if I recall then, before he became president, the state had also asked that he headed the Carley Commission
Yes.
that looked at state funding. And
Yes.
what was the role that group played?
Well, that group played, the idea was that the state would help subsidize the medical school to protect it from its losses. And it couldn't do it to Marquette because Marquette was a Catholic school, and the state couldn't be seen to support it financially. And so David was appointed by Pat Lucey, who was the then governor, to head up a commission to determine what should be paid and how much, and et cetera, et cetera. It was a pretty powerful commission.
Now, again, David Carley, of course, had a bigger-than-life role as president in some respects. But again, his working relationship with Dr. Carrigan, was one where they had different styles, and so there was some friction there, if I recall that as well.
Yes. David was charge, and Jerry was let's be cautious, and so I mean the two got along, but only because Jerry was very smart, and David knew that. Sure. David knew his limitations were business and politics, and not running a medical school. And Jerry knew he didn't have much in the way of fundraising skills, but he was very skillful at organizing a medical school and the educational output.
Now, when the decision was made that the medical school should be relocated to the new Milwaukee Regional Medical Center campus, the old county grounds, there needed to be fundraising, and so that's where Project Merit was created.
Yes.
What was your role in terms of working on any of the legal activities related to Project Merit?
Well, Project Merit was a $17 million fundraising goal. At that time, it was the largest fundraising program in the city. I'd never seen $17 million. And I remember Bob Stevenson, who was head of Alice Chalmers and was chairman of the board. I accompanied him on a call, and he said, we're only going to ask this once, we'll never ask you for money again.
Wrong thing to say.
And I said, I ground my teeth and said, Bob, you can't say that. We're going to ask for more money over the years. But it was a big deal. And all the movers and shakers in town, Tiny Raider, Blaine Reekie, who was Universal Foods, I'll think of it. But all of those guys came together and did Project Merit. Jack Guilefus, then president of the Marine Bank, and Jack Puliker, president of the M&I, got together and got all the banks to come on board. And John Kelly came on board with that, and Blaine Reekie, Brent Ruppel came on board. So there was a lot of...
And you've named basically the leadership, the infrastructure of the business community in Milwaukee. We're all leaders.
All involved.
Mm-hmm.
And so the medical college suddenly became the pet of the power brokers of Milwaukee. And it became the prestigious board to be on, was the Medical College of Wisconsin. And so we raised the money. We raised more than $17 million. And but there was one gap the $17 million on one side, the state money on the other side, some borrowed money that we had, and then there was this gap of, I think it was about $5 million that needed to be filled in. And we came up with a novel idea called the Revolver, and that is that we would take the money that came in as pledges and use that as collateral in the banks to support a bank loan, a revolving line of credit, as it were. And the banks in Milwaukee are very conservative, and they only take collateral which is hard and fast, except this was whooshy because it's pledges. And as you know, a pledge is not legally enforceable if they renege on it. So the banks were taking a tremendous chance, and that was led by Jack Guilefus. Okay. Jack was very instrumental in getting the bankers together, and I can remember some of those meetings. Bankers were shaking their heads, wondering what happens if we get caught with our pants down. But they took the chance that the pledges would be good and that the Milwaukee economy would support it, and it worked. So.
Now, if I recall, and you probably were involved in the legal paperwork, there were some strings tied to the state funding support in terms of representation on the board of directors, as well as the number of Wisconsin students that would be attending the medical school.
Yeah.
What were those stipulations?
Yeah, the state, David Carley negotiated this with the commission. He would accept 1/3 of the board would be appointed by the governor for a 6-year term, and that 50% of the students would come from the state of Wisconsin, would be state residents.
And also the size of the medical school class was also identified too, wasn't it?
Yes, it was identified originally at 220.
Okay.
And eventually we worked it down to 200, and now we're back up to 250.
Uh-huh.
So it fluctuates, but the state had a very big interest in trying to provide physicians that would stay in the state.
But even with the 50% stipulation, that also identified, though, too, the need to try and balance the tuition between the Medical College of Wisconsin and University of Wisconsin School of Medicine, correct?
The idea was that to a student attending the Medical College of Wisconsin, the state would provide a fund to the school that would equalize the tuition that a student would pay who would go to Madison as opposed to here. So the state students did have a subsidy. Unfortunately, it didn't grow as fast as it kept up with inflation. So as a result, the disparity between the students going to Madison and the students staying here at MCW got wider and wider as the years went on, and we had to really work to equalize that again.
Now, in Project Merit, of course, was a success. The medical school was then built on the Regional Medical Center campus, and when it opened in 1978, my recollection is that the facility wasn't completed yet, and when the classes started being offered out here, what were your recollections about the opening of the?
They were opened in a tent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the construction hadn't finished yet. There was a tent out in front where the Health Research Center is right now, and that's where classes originally were taught. But that's just the first 2 years of medical school, because the second 2 years of medical school are taught in the hospitals, and the hospitals were up. The county hospital was our principal teaching hospital at the time, along with the VA, and then Froedtert came on board.
Yeah, Froedtert opened in 1980, and Milwaukee Children's Hospital was still located downtown at 17th Street near the Marquette campus.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And John Weiss was the president of Children's Hospital, and he had a view that was very visionary, because his board didn't want to move.
In fact, you're right. Yeah, there was some challenges. The Children's almost didn't move out here.
Yes, the board didn't want to move, and John Weiss had a very difficult time convincing them that they had to move. As a matter of fact, Lori Eline resigned from the board when they decided to move, because she was darned if she was going to work with Milwaukee County and have their hospital out there. But what John Weiss saw is every hospital in town was opening a pediatric unit. because the Children's Hospital was ancient and was not really up to snuff, couldn't do research, it didn't have the fundamentals. And so John really forced the issue. And the day that Children's opened its doors, every hospital in town shut down its pediatric unit because they realized the Children's Hospital of Wisconsin was going to be the 500-pound gorilla because it would be affiliated with the medical school. It would do all the tertiary pediatric work. It would do research, which is proved to be true, as we've seen over the years with the genetic work that has been done there with a young lad from Madison that was saved by the medical college, and the young lady from Fond du Lac who was bitten by a bat and survived because of the work of the research done at Children's Hospital. It was really remarkable.
Now, at the same time that you were serving in all these different roles with MCW, you were also very engaged in the community.
Yes.
You were engaged in the church with your work with the Archdiocese. You were engaged with your alma mater at Marquette in terms of the fundraising campaign for the Alumni Center. And you were engaged in the arts community in terms of creating the vibrant arts community, as well as work with the Milwaukee Repertory Theater and the Milwaukee Ballet. Let's talk about your role in the community then.
Well, that comes about because of a pathological inability to say no. My wife used to send me off to work like Sesame Street, today is brought to you by the letter K. She would say, Mike, remember that today is brought to you by the number 0 and the word no. So, yeah, I got involved. Fortunately, Quarles and Brady was good in that regard, letting me run a little, and I was able to do some things that were, to my way of thinking, important. Just to give you an example, when I first moved here, one of the first arts organizations I joined was the Milwaukee Repertory Theater. And I got on their board, but John Holbrook, a lawyer with a firm, took me aside one day and pointed out the power plant that was sitting at the corner of Wells Street and Water, and said that should be the new home of the Milwaukee Repertory Theater. And I sort of laughed and said, yeah, right. And lo and behold, I got elected chairman of the board. And right at that time, they had completed a study. And the study recommended that they find a new theater location, that the theater that had been provided at the Performing Arts Center, the Todd Ware Theater, had outgrown its ability to handle the type of plays that the Repertory Theater wanted to be able to do. And that. Well, the light went on in my head, and I thought, why not try to get the power company and do it. So I decided I would take 90 days and see if I could talk to movers and shakers in town to think about that, because they had built the Performing Arts Center, and that was supposed to take care of the theater. And I spent that 90 days walking around into the office of every major mover and shaker, and the university was told no. I got thrown out of every office I went into. They said Milwaukee's a one avenue town, it's a one this, that, and the other thing, and so I was getting very frustrated. So Bill Randall told me to talk to Fred, so I called Fred. And we met at the town club that night for a Coke, because Fred doesn't drink. And I spun out the idea of building. He said, Mike, that's a crazy idea. He said, but I like it. I'm not going to give you any money, but I'll lend you my name. And I said, Fred, that's enough. If Fred Stratton puts his imprimatur on this, we've got a chance. And so I called up some people who were at the theater, and they said, why don't you go to New York and see what the Metropolitan Museum of Art has done to build its new facility, the Museum of Modern Art. So I went to New York and I met with the guy from MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, that put the deal together. And what he had done was he had found a piece of property in Manhattan, and he made this a ground lease and sold the air rights and the air to developer to build a high-rise apartment, a high-end apartment. And the first 3 floors of the air rights were reserved for MoMA and would be paid for out of the profits that came from selling the air rights to the developer.
Sure.
And that's how the Museum of Modern Art got built. And I thought, what a great idea. So I came charging back to Milwaukee saying, I've got to find a developer. Well, the first guy I talked to was John Hammes. It was just completed a development out on the pumpkin farm out on Good Hope and Highway 45. And I talked to him about being a developer we'll get the property from the power company and give it to you to build a high-rise if you can underwrite the theater. So we got John to agree to the deal, and then I had to get the power company. So I went over and met with Charlie McNear, who was the chairman of the power company at the time. And I sat down, I got the board. His property was for sale. It was a beautiful piece of property right on the river, Wells Street, Water Street, the heart of downtown. And he had it on the market for about $2 million. And I got the rep board to approve me offering him $150,000.
Whoa, that's a big difference.
Yeah, a big difference. So I went into his office and I dressed in sackcloth and ashes and started spinning out my tale. I got about a quarter of the way into it, and he looked at me and he said in his inimitable West Virginia twang, well, Mike, why don't I just give it to you? when he pulled me off the ceiling and I stopped shouting and screaming, I knew we had a project. And that was how we built the new repertory theater complex, and it included an office tower, a hotel, a bank, a rehab of the Pabst Theater, plus 3 new theaters for the Milwaukee Rep.
And it was a real shot in the arm and really helped create a vibrant
Theater
arts
district.
community then.
Well, in that whole Water Street complex of bars and restaurants and came to life because of that.
Now, also with your involvement with the Milwaukee Repertory Theater was your work with playwright Larry Shue. And what was your engagement there?
Well, I knew Larry as an actor and as a playwright.
And he was known for The Foreigner. What were some of the...
The Foreigner, of course.
The Nerd.
The Nerd was his first produced play. And he wrote The Foreigner, which has been produced numerous times.
Sure.
But one of his best plays is rarely done anymore, but it was his first play. It was a one-act play called Grandma Duck is Dead.
I haven't even heard of that one.
And it is hysterical. It's set in a college dorm room on the last day, the day before the last day of school, and the guy has got a paper he's got to hand in, and he's feverishly working on his paper, and everything goes wrong, and it's just a hilarious play. But I can't get the rep to do it. But I think because it's one act. But it was done at the Court Street Theater when I saw it. But Larry was a talent that died way too soon. He was killed in a plane crash in West Virginia, and a plane ran into a mountain. And it was just such a tragic loss.
But then, following that,
I started the Larry Shue Foundation, which was a foundation to provide funds to actors, to provide them with the funds to permit them to hone their craft.
now, in addition to your work with the Milwaukee Repertory Theater, you were also involved on the board of the Milwaukee Ballet.
Yes.
And really became involved at some point where you were actually running the ballet and helped save the ballet, if I recall correctly.
That was 2 years that I like to forget.
What happened?
Well, I got elected to the board of the Milwaukee Ballet, and the ballet decided that it couldn't function with just a Milwaukee audience, that it needed a bigger platform. And so it started negotiations with the Pennsylvania Ballet out of Philadelphia to merge. And ultimately it did sign the merger agreement, and it became the Pennsylvania Milwaukee Ballet. And Ricky Weiss was its artistic director. And then I became chairman of the board. And I saw, and everybody saw, that this was not working. That the expected savings were not working. There was jealousy between the two cities. Everything was just in a cocked hat. And the ballet was losing lots of money. So I had the enviable task of taking the thing apart. And I had to go to the community to beg the funds necessary to provide the cushion to catch the ballet as it fell out of the merger. And I'll never forget going in to see Tiny Rader, who was the head of the biggest foundation, the Bradley Foundation, to ask him for $3 million. And he said, after he cursed me up and down one side and down the other, and I said, it wasn't my fault, Tiny. He gave me $2 million, and that was the linchpin of putting this back together, because then the rest of Milwaukee decided that if Tiny Rader can support it through the Bradley Foundation, that they can support it too. So we were able to pull the ballet back and trim it down a little. We hired a terrific Mike Sturdivant, terrific executive director, and we put the ballet back on the stage, and it's been there ever since, and it does quite well.
Now, in addition to your engagement with the arts community, again, you were a loyal alumnus of Marquette University.
I was president of the Alumni Association, and I was named Alumnus of the Year. Yeah, I was very, I spent 4 years there as an undergrad, and then 7 years as a Jesuit seminarian, so I did have a connection.
And you were involved in the fundraising activities then for the Alumni Center at Marquette.
Bob Pavlik and I were the co-chairs of the...
and Dr. Pavlik was an alumnus of the medical school, correct?
Yes, that's correct. A very wonderful OBGYN doctor. And the two of us put together the fund drive that built the Alumni Memorial Union. When I was at Marquette as a student, I was president of the Brooks Memorial Union board, which was the student-run union, which was a dinky little place, but
Sure.
it was
Mhm.
what we had.
I remember the Brooks Union, yes.
Yeah, and then I became president of the student body, and so I always had the union as a love of my life, so it was natural for Father Rayner to ask me to head the fund drive to build a new union. So that's what we did, and it's a wonderful union.
Oh, it's a beautiful facility.
Yeah.
Hmm. You also served the church then, too, as legal counsel for the Archdiocese, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's correct. I was lawyer for several of the operations of the Archdiocese. I didn't get involved at all in the pre-scandal bankruptcy, but I was involved in lots of areas of the church and did legal work and raised money. And
Well, in fact, you were honored by the Vatican, if I recall.
well, I won the Vatican II award, or was awarded the Vatican II award, the first one. That was from Archbishop Weakland. Yeah.
So, in addition to your work, though, with the community, you were still very, very involved as the secretary to the board with engagement here. And after David Carley stepped down as president of the Medical College of Wisconsin, he was succeeded by Leonard Cronkite. Tell me about Dr. Cronkite's leadership style.
Well, he was a former general in the military. He was a military doctor, and he was out in Boston, and he was a very laid-back president, if I may use the phrase. He was he sort of looked at this as a retirement, an early retirement. But that didn't bother Ed Lenin, who was his dean.
And yes, and Ed Lenin had succeeded then Jerry Carrigan as the dean, correct?
Yes, he had succeeded Jerry Carrigan and was the dean. And he worked well with Len. But Ed Lenin worked well with anybody. He was a terrific dean.
What was Ed Lenin's leadership style, and what was his role as dean?
Well, Ed was a typical, how shall I say it, Irish, happy-go, anything, let's do it happily. People liked him immediately. He was very eloquent. He could drop a good speech in a twinkling of an eye. He was really a good man, and loved the school. He served it faithfully. He served it with distinction. He was a good guy.
Is it accurate to say that when Cronkite was the president and Lenin was dean, in many respects, Lenin was the figure that perhaps was more visible?
Absolutely. Yeah, Len really ran it sort of like his military. He would meet once a week with his faculty, leadership of the faculty, and listen to them, and then go on with what they were doing. But it was Ed Lenin that really made the school hum. Took the interest in it, and hired the good people, promoted good people to positions of importance.
Now, Cronkite stepped down as president in 1984, and Ed Lenin was elevated from dean to president of the institution then.
That's correct.
Was there a change in his leadership style when he went from dean to president?
Not really. He remained affable and loyal and eloquent in his defense of the school. Students liked him. Faculty liked him. He was a good guy.
Now, in 1985, Dr. Richard Cooper then was named as the dean,
Dean.
and so it was a leadership of Lenin and Cooper.
Yeah.
And Cooper's leadership style, though, differed from Lenin's.
Oh, yes.
How would you describe Cooper's leadership style?
Well, Buzz was his nickname. Buzz was a driven man. He knew what he wanted. He was single-minded in his pursuit of getting done what he wanted. He was hard on his faculty, but he was hard on himself. He didn't ask anything of anybody that he wouldn't do himself, and he had built a terrific cancer center at Penn, Pennsylvania, and he wanted to do the same here. And he shared my view that one of the reasons Buzz and I could get along was that we both had a view that a medical school is judged by the quality and quantity of its research. And that research is the fundamental key. That was my stepping stone. And Buzz shared that vision. And so we worked well together. We were able to build a health research center. And I remember the first thing I did as president was to add 60,000 square feet of research space by building the fourth floor on this
the medical
building.
education building.
Yeah.
Mhm. Now, during this period when Cronkite and then Lenin became president, and Lenin and Cooper were the deans, you were also serving as the general counsel for the medical schools. What were some of the legal issues that perhaps you had to deal with in those years for MCW?
For Cronkite, and it was our relationship with the state, our relationship with the federal government, a lot of real estate issues, issues of students. I remember one case, this is hysterical. We had a resident in psychiatry, and we had to get rid of him. He wasn't working out, and so we decided to remove him, and he went and got a lawyer, and the lawyer brought a motion for a temporary injunction to enjoin us from getting rid of this fellow. So I'm before Judge Reynolds down, and he brought it in federal district court, and I'm arguing against the imposition of an injunction. And I said they don't deserve an injunction because there are three things you have to prove to win an injunction. First is that there's reasonable success on the merits of the case, and we've given you all the cases that say that the school has the right to get rid of a student if it's academically appropriate. There's irreparable loss that if the student were terminated, there's irreparable loss. And I said, there's no irreparable loss here because he can hold himself out as a psychiatrist without completing a residency in psychiatry. All he needs is the MD degree. And I said, well, for example, Dr. David Rubin, author of that wildly popular book, Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask, holds himself out as a psychiatrist, and he's not board certified, and he's not even board eligible. And Judge Reynolds looks over his bench and says, where did counsel get that information? And I said, oh no. I said, you really want to know, Your Honor? And he said, yeah, well, I'd be curious. And I said, well, it's in this month's issue of Playboy. And of course, the courtroom erupted in gales of laughter. But we won the case.
That's the most important thing. Now, one of the other legal activities that you were involved in, if I recall, was the creation of MCW. And how did that come about? They were all separate hospital-based residency programs, and how did they become consolidated?
Well, what happened was that when our residents would circulate around the various hospitals, they would get withholding from federal withholding tax. But at county, they didn't. And because county didn't enter into the federal program for salaries. So in order to equal it, we created MCW, which was the MCW affiliated hospitals where our residents would be paid through MCW and didn't have that disparity between the county check and the check at, say, St. Joe's.
And so the residents wouldn't be going on and off of payrolls of all
Right.
these different hospitals.
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And that worked pretty well. And it also helped us to engage with hospitals.
And in some respects, it was a national model because,
Yes.
so you were really breaking some new ground then with the
yes,
creation of
yes.
that.
I was very proud of that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Mike, I know time is short today. We haven't even gotten into your presidency yet, which is something I'd like to talk about in the future, but I thought it was important for us to capture your engagement in the community, your engagement with the institution before you became president, because there's so much rich history here. So I appreciate the time you've taken so far today, and then what we can do is schedule another time then to really start getting into your engagement as president.